Since the first trailer dropped and inaudible spectrums introduced us to Allier's brilliant, iconic, and flawless design, Fire Emblem Engage has been a pretty hot-button, controversial topic. Even from the initial leak, it felt like the community's response was so overwhelmingly negative that it was dismissed as impossible to be genuine, based on no real grounds other than Allier's character design being too far out there, too aesthetically unhinged for the Fire Emblem brand, and perhaps too unapologetically epic. And even just prior to release, gaming media's critical response seemed pretty mixed. So what's the truth? What's the real scoop on Fire Emblem Engage? How does it stack up to the series' past entries for returning fans? And how well will it fare for any newcomers drawn in by the flashier presentation? Well, I'm very pleased to say that the TLDR is that I love this game, and would happily recommend it to anyone who's even remotely interested. Unlike with Tropical Frogs, this time bright colors means ideal for human enjoyment. I'm Levin Setti, and let's talk first impressions on Fire Emblem Engage. Now, as a quick disclaimer, I'm only about 3/4 through the game, so my viewpoints could still change, but I've put in over 40 hours of gameplay, so I think I have earned the right to hold opinions. And my biggest complaint so far has been that I, as a human, have to pry myself away from the game to, sleep, eat, and work on this video, so please consider clicking those good buttons down there so I feel like it was worth it. For returning fans, Engage is a massive love letter to the series, with all the many positives and few negatives that can bring along. You're probably already aware that it brings back fan-favorite characters from every past entry. We got you,
Marth!
We got you,
Roy! Link! Ice Climber! Mewtwo!
It's a little bit of a Fire Emblem fever dream, and it might come at the cost of more cohesive world building and storytelling, but if you let yourself enjoy it, you'll have a grand old time basking in the spectacle and picking apart all the little references. Not just in returning characters, but also in map design, gameplay mechanics, and beautifully rearranged music. The story sticks very close to the series' roots, telling the tale of Allir, the divine dragon who awakens into a world where they must defeat the resurrected Fell Dragon to prevent a doomsday scenario. Longtime fans with a keen eye for detail may recognize this as being 90% the same tale told by almost every other Fire Emblem game, or as being 99% the same as Fire Emblem Awakening. The story, admittedly, is not Engage's strongest suit, and feels like a step down from Three Houses in a lot of ways, but honestly, I don't mind that. The smaller scale story is at least fine, and there are some fun bumps, hiccups, and twists to hold your attention, and this game has plenty of other things going for it to keep you invested even when the story might not. Incredulous Syndromes really tightened up the gameplay this time to possibly the best that Fire Emblem's grid-based tactical combat has ever been. Maybe it's a little early to make that call, but there are so many fresh game mechanics and refinements of older ones that make Engage an absolute joy to play. Utilizing the robust but simple class system, mastering the use of emblems, setting up massive chain attacks, and using skill inheritance to go absolutely sicko mode and dominate map situations is more satisfying and addicting than the franchise has felt in a long time. In recent entries like Three Houses and Echoes, a lot of the time it felt like I was hooked by wanting to get to know the characters more, or to see where the plot is heading, or see the lore of the world come together. In Engage, I am literally having trouble sleeping because I cannot wait to see what trials the next map has in store for me, what seemingly impossible boss scenario or scenarios lie at the end of it, and how I'm going to draw on all of the game's mechanics to the best of my ability to knock their teeth in. The map designs are awesome, some of the best in the series, and they tend to be paced perfectly. Just when you think you've got things figured out, they'll throw a curveball at you and you have to think fast or die. It's always just barely possible to pull through, and succeeding makes me feel like a genius tactician commanding a fierce army. That feeling of power, of building up godlike units and mastering the strategy of how to deploy them, has always been a big part of the appeal in Fire Emblem for me, and it's better than ever in this one. Everything is so fun this time around, I can't overstate that. There are 3 key tweaks to the Fire Emblem formula this time that I think really create, destroy me in the comments for this one, the most engaging gameplay in the franchise to date. The first one, and I think the most obvious change that comes to mind regarding this game, is the return of the weapon triangle. In older Fire Emblems, this would typically give small bonuses or penalties to hit rate and damage in combat depending on who had the advantage. Now, initiating combat with advantage will also break the enemy, stopping them from counterattacking in this combat and the next, which adds whole new layers of strategy whether you're on offense or defense. Every encounter and choke point on the map feels so much more lively, interactive, and tense than a turn-based game has any business being. The second big change is unit types. Fire Emblem has always sort of had this. Cavalry and flying type units typically have perks like being dummy busted, completely overpowered, running across the map twice in one turn, and so on, because they get super high mobility and can use that to dominate the battlefield, and quickly. But now, other types of units get perks of their own to match that kind of power. For example, armors are immune to being broken by the weapon triangle, which ironically kinda makes them broken in their own right. Sword, lance, and axe foot soldiers get the backup perk, which lets them hop in and deal a bit of true damage when nearby allies initiate combat. And let me tell you, death by 1,000 paper cuts is a real strategy in Engage. Stuff like this makes building your army so much more dynamic, rewarding, and fun. Macro strategies can be huge, and there are dozens of different ways to approach any challenge. And finally, the third big change, and the one I'm sure you've been waiting to hear about, is that they sorta sized everything down a little bit. Movement stats across the board are lower, which again helps to balance the different unit types a little more, and the maps feel a little smaller to account for that. You might be thinking, that is less game to play, Levin, that is not a good thing. But in practice, this makes everything feel so much snappier and cuts out a good chunk of dead time. Think of it as reducing every map down to just the coolest parts. In terms of game design, Engage feels focused and clean, and the maps have kept me consistently on the edge of my seat, especially as I've progressed deeper into the game. Like, I'm actually cheering when a Lear manages to survive another turn by dodging that 86% hit rate that I didn't realize could double her. And of course, there's a ton more that I can't get into in this video. The game is not lacking depth. Huh? I forgot something. Oh yeah, I guess there are stands now or whatever. Engaging with emblems is a really cool part of the game. I like that I get to show some favoritism to the units I like a lot, and the abilities they grant are really varied, interesting, and powerful, but that's balanced by the admittedly pretty stiff challenges that this game likes to throw down. There's nothing quite like realizing you can get out of what seemed like an unwinnable situation by going Super Saiyan and nuking a guy from the other side of the map, and then hearing your new husbando or waifu spout some simply savage sass like it's just another day at the office.
I will not forget your loss.
Plus, it's a lot of fun to pick apart the references within each emblem's skill set and see how they translated the mechanics of past games into the new one. Now, while I've focused on how these changes and new mechanics build on established Fire Emblem traditions, they also make Engage a great starting point for newcomers to the series. The emblems are recognizable characters, which can make it a little easier to find something to latch onto in the game's world, or to look forward to as you advance through the story. The smaller scale of the gameplay puts the best bits more clearly on display and makes things a little more digestible and easy to process. You can put together a general strategy for how to tackle most chapters without much trouble, although some of the later maps may beat you down and send you back to the drawing board a few times. At least they did for me, but honestly that just makes it so much more satisfying when you do put together a winning strategy. Understanding the break mechanic makes it easier than ever to feed experience to units who might be lagging behind, and turtling with an armor in front is a more viable strategy than ever thanks to the unit type buffs. Weapons now have unlimited durability, removing one of the most deterrent and anxiety-inducing trademarks of Fire Emblem. And that change even manages to improve the game by balancing these weapons through their stats instead of relying chiefly on you just choosing not to spend your only 20 uses of the really cool sword. And on top of this, the game brings back recent series staples like permadeath being optional, several difficulty settings, and a generous ability to rewind time and undo that one silly little move where you let your flyer get clipped by the archer with a billion attacks that you don't have to redo the entire hour you've already spent playing the chapter. All of this together makes Fire Emblem as accessible as it's ever been, and you have a tremendous amount of control to play the game in whatever way you personally find enjoyable. Some older games could be powerfully frustrating, but Engage lends you all the tools to keep controller throwing to a minimum. So I'm getting carried away with all the things I like about this game, because they are many. But it doesn't stick the landing on everything. I think in particular the world building suffers a bit because of how much Fire Emblem fan service they try to squeeze in there. It feels like they said, let's just throw a bunch of cool nonsense in there for the fans and hope they don't ask too many questions. And personally, I'm perfectly happy with that arrangement. But to go with that, some of the characters feel like they're not developed super well, which has been a problem in the series before, but might be amplified here. They tend to be defined by one or maybe two particular obsessions or personality quirks, and I'm not sure that all of them are given the chance to rise above or develop beyond that. This can get annoying, but it'll probably vary on a person-to-person basis. A lot of the characters from the early game grated on me a little bit, but as I progressed through the story, I met plenty of characters that I did vibe with. Like, it was totally worth having to hear Fram talk endlessly about the Divine Dragon fan club in order to get far enough to meet Goldmary, who is absolutely perfect. There are hits and there are misses. This certainly is not the best written game in the franchise, but it's not awful either. The biggest problem with Engage might be the sometimes questionable UI decisions. There are little things like Engage or the special Engage attack being the first option in the menu when you move a unit, or the sometimes unintuitive battle forecasts. But then there are more consequential things like how difficult it can be to view particular character or weapon stats from the battlefield, which can make planning larger strategies more difficult in terms of accounting for effective damage or skill bonuses. It also just drives me crazy that when you inherit a new skill to a unit, you have to go to a completely different menu to equip it. It doesn't matter, but it is obnoxious, and I forgot to do it more than once. And these aren't the only UI problems, but all of these blemishes are mosquito bites, not scorpion stings. Even if they come up a lot, they're minor bothers, not things that are going to ruin the entire experience for you. For the sake of ending on a positive note, here's a quick little lightning round of stuff I loved about Fire Emblem Engage that didn't quite fit in anywhere else. I'm in love with the aesthetics of the game. The internet will probably tell me I have bad taste, but I was hooked from the very first leak of Alir's crazy hair. I think it's a little bit like this tweet about Shadow the Hedgehog. The game looks exciting, and it feels exciting, and it just works for me. The battle animations are better than Fire Emblem has ever looked in 3D. I love that there's unique dialogue between every playable character and every emblem as you advance their bonds. It's not much, but I love getting to hear Sigurd's smooth voice in whatever amount they'll let me. The music, new and old both, is excellent throughout. The Emblem boss theme is stuck in my head as I'm recording this. It's a fun little extra that you get to run around and explore the battlefields after you finish each map. The Somniel is a great home base this time, way less of a slog than the monastery from Three Houses. I think I want to make a longer video about this, but the short version is that it's way less drawn out, feels way less essential if you do choose to skip it, and when you do spend some time there, your efforts tend to lead to clear and immediate results instead of taking months of in-game time to see a payoff. To sum up, Engage is a beautiful entry in the Fire Emblem series that does just about everything right in building on the franchise's recent outings. The finished product is a laser-focused gameplay experience, and the team at Indelible Spittoons really hit a 1% crit this time. In the good way. It might not be a perfect game, but it doesn't need to be. The parts that are good are so good that I just can't put it down, and the ideas that might miss don't feel super consequential. I'm not quite finished with my first playthrough yet, and I already can't wait to dive back in for my second run. I unlocked max bond level with Fire Emblem Engage around chapter 16, and it took no dedicated training whatsoever. I really can't recommend the game highly enough. If you've also been playing, I'd love to hear what you agree or disagree with me about down below, or if you've been on the fence and do decide to pick up the game, I'd love to hear your thoughts too. And I don't think this will be the last time you hear me talking about Engage, so slap that subscribe button to make sure you see what else I put together. Until then.